I let my sister think she was the favorite daughter, until Mom's funeral when the real will was read. Growing up, everyone always said my sister was the golden child. She got straight A's without trying, won every spelling bee, and somehow managed to make our parents beam with pride at every family gathering. Meanwhile, I was the one who came home with grass stains on my knees and paint under my fingernails. I struggled with math, forgot to turn in homework, and generally felt like I was living in her shadow. But what nobody knew was that Mom had been quietly watching everything, taking notes in ways I never imagined. My sister always got the bigger slice of cake, the prettier dress for school pictures, and the first choice of everything. She'd flash that perfect smile and get whatever she wanted. I learned early on to just accept being second best. It hurt sometimes, especially during those quiet moments when I'd catch Mom looking at her with such obvious admiration. I'd wonder what was wrong with me, why I couldn't be more like her. But I kept my mouth shut and tried to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way. When we became teenagers, the divide became even more obvious. My sister got a car for her 16th birthday, while I got a used bicycle. She went to expensive summer camps while I worked part-time jobs. College applications rolled around, and suddenly there was money for her dream school, but concerns about budget when it came to my choices. I ended up at the local community college, telling myself it was fine, that I'd figure out my path eventually. My sister went off to her prestigious university with a full ride from our parents. The thing is, I genuinely loved my sister despite everything. She wasn't mean about being the favorite, she just accepted it as natural. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with what might have been sympathy, but she never said anything. We'd laugh together watching movies, share secrets about boys, and she'd even help me with homework when I was really struggling. But there was always this unspoken understanding that she was the special one, and I was just there. After college, my sister landed an amazing job right away while I bounced between different positions, trying to find something that clicked. She bought a beautiful house, got engaged to a wonderful guy, and seemed to have everything mapped out perfectly. I was still living in a tiny apartment, dating inconsistently, and feeling like I was constantly playing catch-up. Family dinners became exercises in celebrating her achievements while I smiled and nodded along, pushing down the familiar ache of inadequacy. When Mom got sick, everything shifted but somehow stayed the same. My sister would visit on weekends, bringing flowers and expensive gifts, staying for a few hours before heading back to her busy life. I was the one who moved back home, who took time off work, who sat through endless doctor appointments and held Mom's hand during the scary moments. My sister would call regularly, always apologetic about not being there more, but her life was so demanding, so important. Those months caring for Mom were some of the hardest of my life, but also strangely precious. We'd sit together in the garden she'd tended for decades, and she'd tell me stories about when I was little that I'd never heard before. She remembered every scraped knee I'd gotten climbing trees, every terrible painting I'd made in art class that she'd secretly kept, every time I'd tried to comfort her during her own difficult moments. I started to see glimpses of something I'd never noticed before, a quiet pride in her eyes when she looked at me. My sister would arrive for visits looking polished and put together, bringing updates about her promotion and wedding plans. Mom would smile and ask all the right questions, but I noticed she seemed almost tired by these conversations. Afterwards, she'd want to walk around the yard with me, pointing out which plants needed water or telling me about the neighbors. These quiet moments felt different somehow, more real than the performance she put on during my sister's visits. The final weeks were brutal. Mom was in and out of the hospital, and I was there for every single moment. My sister came when she could, but there were always conflicts with work trips or wedding planning or some other priority. I held Mom's hand as she slipped away, whispering that I loved her and that it was okay to let go. My sister arrived 2 hours later, devastated that she'd missed it. The guilt in her eyes was almost worse than my own grief. Planning the funeral was a nightmare of decisions and arrangements. My sister threw herself into making everything perfect, ordering expensive flowers and booking the nicest venue. She seemed to need the funeral to be spectacular, maybe to make up for not being there at the end. I just wanted something that would honor Mom's memory, something simple and meaningful. We compromised on most things, but I could see the stress was eating at both of us. The day of the funeral was surprisingly beautiful, one of those crisp autumn days that Mom had always loved. People came from all over to pay their respects, and everyone had stories about how Mom had touched their lives. My sister gave a beautiful eulogy about Mom's strength and grace, her voice breaking only once. I couldn't speak at all, the grief was still too raw. Afterwards, people kept approaching me, thanking me for taking such good care of Mom, telling me how much it had meant to her. I felt numb to all of it. The lawyer showed up at the house the next morning with a manila envelope that would change everything. My sister and I sat on opposite ends of Mom's old couch, the same one where we'd watched countless movies together as kids. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading in that formal way that legal documents demand. At first, everything sounded exactly as I'd expected. The house, the car, the savings account, all the obvious things that would naturally go to the golden child. But then the lawyer paused and pulled out a second document. He explained that there were actually two wills. The first one, dated 5 years ago, left everything to my sister exactly as we just heard. But the second one, dated just 8 months ago, told a completely different story. My hands started shaking before I even understood what was happening. Mom had been rewriting her will during those quiet months when I was caring for her, watching me in ways I'd never realized. The new will left almost everything to me. The house, the investments, the family jewelry, even the old photo albums I'd spent hours looking through with Mom during her final months. My sister got a modest amount, enough to be comfortable, but nothing like the fortune she'd been expecting. But the real shock came in the letter Mom had written to be read alongside the will. In it, she explained that she'd always known I was the one who truly understood love, sacrifice, and what family meant. My sister's face went through about 10 different emotions in the space of 30 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, hurt, anger, and finally a kind of hollow acceptance. She asked if there was some mistake, if maybe Mom had been confused or influenced by medication. The lawyer assured her everything was legitimate, that Mom had been completely clear about her intentions. The letter went on to explain that while she'd always been proud of my sister's achievements, she'd been even more proud of my character, my kindness, my willingness to put others first. What hit me hardest was reading Mom's words about all those moments I'd thought she wasn't paying attention. She'd noticed every time I'd let my sister have the bigger portion, every time I'd stayed quiet when something wasn't fair, every time I'd chosen peace over standing up for myself. She'd seen how I'd cared for the neighbors' kids when their parents were going through a divorce, how I'd volunteered at the animal shelter, how I'd always been the one to remember birthdays and anniversaries for extended family. The letter revealed that Mom had been setting up a trust fund for me since I was in high school, adding to it whenever she could. She'd been quietly proud of my community college degree, my various jobs, my willingness to try new things and learn from failure. She'd been saving newspaper clippings about local volunteer work I'd done, keeping copies of thank you notes I'd written to elderly relatives, documenting a life of small kindnesses that I'd never thought anyone noticed. My sister sat in stunned silence for almost an hour after the lawyer left. Finally, she asked if I'd known about any of this. I honestly hadn't. I'd been so focused on just surviving each day, on being there for Mom, that I'd never considered there might be some deeper recognition happening. The woman I'd spent my whole life thinking preferred my sister had actually been quietly celebrating me all along. It was almost too much to process. The aftermath was complicated in ways I couldn't have anticipated. My sister's friends and her fiancé kept asking questions about the will, clearly assuming something shady had happened. Some people whispered that I'd manipulated Mom during her illness, that I'd taken advantage of a vulnerable woman. My sister never said these things directly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes sometimes. The golden child narrative had been so deeply ingrained that nobody could quite believe it had been wrong all along. But slowly, things started to shift. My sister began remembering moments from our childhood differently. She realized that Mom had always asked about my day first, had always seemed more interested in my struggles than her successes. She started to see how Mom's face had lit up when I'd walk into a room, how she'd saved my terrible teenage poetry, how she'd bragged to neighbors about my kindness rather than my achievements. The hardest part was realizing that I'd been so focused on what I thought I wasn't getting that I'd missed what I was actually receiving. Mom had been showing me her love in different ways, quieter ways that I'd interpreted as indifference. She'd been teaching me resilience by not swooping in to fix everything, building my character by letting me figure things out myself. The golden child treatment my sister had received was actually the lesser gift. My sister and I had a long conversation about 6 months later, one of those raw, honest talks that changes everything. She admitted that she'd always felt pressure to be perfect, to maintain the image of the favored daughter. She'd been terrified of disappointing Mom, of losing that special status. Meanwhile, I'd been free to be human, to make mistakes, to grow into someone genuine rather than someone performing a role. We both realized that Mom had been wiser than either of us had given her credit for. She'd given my sister confidence and opportunities, but she'd given me something more valuable: the freedom to develop real character. My sister had been preparing for a life of external validation, while I'd been learning to find worth within myself. It was a painful but necessary realization for both of us. The money and the house were nice, but what really mattered was understanding that I'd been loved all along. All those years of feeling like the disappointment, the afterthought, the less important daughter had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding. Mom had been proud of me every single day, had been rooting for me in ways I'd never recognized. She'd seen my heart when I couldn't see it myself. Now, 2 years later, I'm still processing everything. My sister and I have a different relationship now, more honest and less competitive. She's had to learn to value herself without external validation, while I've had to learn to accept that I was worthy of love and recognition all along. We're both still figuring out who we are without the roles we'd been playing for so long. I kept Mom's garden going, adding new plants each season and remembering her stories about which ones she'd chosen and why. Sometimes I sit in the same spot where we used to have our quiet conversations, and I can almost hear her voice telling me how proud she was. The golden child narrative had been so powerful that it had fooled everyone, including me. But love doesn't always look like favoritism, and sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give is the space to become yourself. The inheritance was substantial enough that I could quit my job and figure out what I really wanted to do. I started a small nonprofit working with families going through medical crises, helping them navigate the overwhelming world of hospitals and insurance and end-of-life care. My sister donated her portion of the inheritance to get it started, saying it was what Mom would have wanted. Maybe she was right. Looking back, I can see that Mom had been preparing me for this moment my entire life. Every time I'd felt overlooked or undervalued, I'd been learning to find strength within myself. Every time I'd chosen kindness over recognition, I'd been building the character that would eventually be my greatest inheritance. The golden child story had been a beautiful lie that protected something even more beautiful: the truth that love comes in many forms, and sometimes the most precious gifts are the ones that arrive wrapped in ordinary paper. I still have the letter Mom wrote, and I read it sometimes when I'm having a hard day. Her words remind me that being seen and valued isn't always about being celebrated publicly. Sometimes it's about being quietly, consistently loved by someone who recognizes your worth even when you can't see it yourself. That's a kind of wealth that can't be measured in bank accounts or property deeds. It's the kind of inheritance that changes everything, not just for you, but for everyone you touch along the way.